Muscles: Their Origin, Insertion, and Action by Mariah, Abby, Lexi, Julia, and Mackenzie. An anterior and posterior view of the skeletal muscles.
Did you just use your frontalis on me?
Yeah, the frontalis is the skin of the eyebrows on the cranial aponeurosis, and it is used to raise your eyebrows.
Why do you keep blinking?
I'm using my orbicularis ocula. It is the skin around the mouth and is used to blink, and it's located on the frontal bone and the maxilla.
Mariah, did you know when you're making the duck face, you are using the orbicularis oris to protrude the lips with the skin and muscles around the mouth located on the mandible and maxilla?
Are you using your temporalis or your master to chew that gum?
I'm using both. They are both located on the temporal bone, connected to the mandible, and used to close the jaw.
Smile.
Trivia time! What muscle is used to raise the corners of the mouth?
Is it the zygomaticus? Located on the zygomatic bone in the skin and muscles at the corner of the lips?
Correct!
Guess what I'm doing?
Acting like a fish?
No, I'm using my buccinator on the maxilla and mandible near the molish to compress my cheeks together. The buccinator inserts into the orbicularis oris.
Go.
Want to go to the movies with me? Why?
I have to study tomorrow for my test over the muscles.
Oh, so you're using your sternocleidomastoid to rotate your head laterally and say no? It's located on the sternum and clavicle and inserts into the mastoid process in the temporal bone.
That's exactly what I'm doing. Oh my gosh, don't cut yourself!
I'm not going to cut myself. I'm using my platysma muscle to tighten the skin on my neck so I don't get a cut in the connective tissue covering my superior chest muscles.
Oh, what was that for?
I'm stretching out my pectoralis major muscle. I went crazy in the gym last night.
Where's that located?
They say it's located on the clavicle and sternum and inserts into the proximal humerus.
Wow, my rectus abdominis is getting really toned. It is located on the pubis and inserts into the sternum. What are you doing?
I'm rotating my vertebral column to stretch out my external obliques. It is located in the lower 8 ribs and inserts into the iliac crest.
What muscle are you exercising?
My bicep brachii, it is used to flex the elbow. It's located in the scapula of the shoulder girdle and inserts into the proximal radius.
Hey, that was on my brachialis muscle. It starts at the distal humerus and goes to the proximal ulna. Now I can't extend my elbow.
We just use our deltoid muscles to extend our arms away from the midline.
Remember to stretch your iliopsoas, which is attached at the ilium and lumbar vertebrae and goes to the femur.
Thank you.
She is using her adductor muscles to bring her legs together. Its origin is at the pelvis, at the insertion part is at the proximal femur.
She is currently standing on one leg to strengthen her sartorius. The origin of this muscle is the ilium and the insertion is the proximal tibia.
To squat, she's using her quadriceps group, which includes the vastus medialis, intermedius, and lateralis, and the rectus femoris. The origin is the pelvis, and the insertion point is a tibial tuberosity via patellar ligament. That was awful.
She is stretching out her tibialis anterior. The origin is the proximal tibia. The insertion is the first tarsal and the first metatarsal of the foot. The primary action is dorsiflexes and inverts foot. She is using her extensor digitorum longus. The origin is the proximal tibia and radius. The insertion is at distal toes 2 through 5. The primary action is it extends toes and dorsiflexes foot. She is using her fibularis muscles. The origin is at the fibula. The insertion is at the metatarsals of the foot. The primary action is the plantar flex and evert foot. She is working out her trapezius. The origin is the occipital bone in all cervical and thoracic vertebrae. The insertion is at the scapular spine and clavicle. The primary actions extends neck and adducts scapula. She is working out her latissimus dorsi. The origin is the lower spine and iliac crest. The insertion is at the proximal humerus. The primary actions is that it extends and abducts humerus. She is using her erector spinae. The origin is the iliac crest, ribs 3 through 12, and vertebrae. The insertion is at the ribs, thoracic, and cervical vertebrae. The primary action is that it bends the back. She is working out her quadratus lumborum. The origin is at the iliac crest and the lumbar fascia. The insertion is at the transverse process of the upper lumbar vertebrae. The primary action is that it flexes the spine laterally and extends the spine. She is working out her deltoids. The origin is at the scapular spine and clavicle. The insertion is at the humerus. The primary action is the abducts humerus.
She is working out her triceps brachii. The origin is the shoulder girdle and proximal humerus. The insertion point is the olecranon process of the ulna. The primary action is extending the elbow. She is working out her flexor carpi radialis. The origin is the distal humerus. The insertion point is the second and third metacarpals. The primary actions are that it flexes the wrist and abducts the hand. She is working out her flexor carpi ulnaris. The origin is the distal humerus and posterior ulna. The insertion point is the carpals of wrist and fifth metacarpal. The primary actions are that it flexes wrist and adducts hand. She is working out her flexor digitorum superficialis. The origin is the distal humerus, ulna, and radius. The insertion point are the middle phalanges of the second to fifth fingers. Primary actions are to flex the wrist and the fingers. She is working out her extensor carpi radialis. The origin is the humerus. The insertion point is the base of the second and third metacarpals. Primary action is to extend the wrist and abduct the hand. She is working out her extensor digitorum. The origin is the distal humerus. Insertion point is the distal phalanges of the second to fifth fingers. Primary action is to extend the fingers and the wrist. She is stretching her gluteus maximus. The origin is the sacrum and ilium. The insertion point is the proximal femur. The primary action is to extend the hip. She is stretching her gluteus medius. The origin is the ilium. The insertion point is the proximal femur. Primary action is to abduct the thigh and steady the pelvis during walking. She's stretching her hamstring muscles, which include the semitendinosus, the semimembranosus, and the biceps foramus. The origin is the ischial tuberosity. The insertion point is the proximal tibia, and the primary action is to flex the knee and extend the hip. She is stretching her gastrocnemius. The origin is the distal femur. Insertion point is the calcaneus. Primary action is that the plantar flexes the foot and it flexes the knee. She is stretching her soleus. The origin is the proximal tibia and fibula. Insertion point is the calcaneus. Primary action is that the plantar flexes the foot.